Hey, everybody. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive, the Intel Brief, the weekly wrap-up where we let you know some of the major things that have happened during this week, because I know everybody didn't get a chance to watch every show, but we don't want you to miss anything. So let's jump right into it. One of the big ones we had this week was Doug Macgregor, one of the favorites of this channel, and he was we were asking him the question about why does it seem one party and then the other seem to be battling with each other, especially heading into the 2024 presidential election. Instead of distinguishing themselves one from the other, they seem to be almost unified on the issue of Israel, and we wondered why that was. Doug gave us his thoughts.
It's all about the election. It's all about, I want power. You have different sets of people backing each candidate, but they overlap. And the principal issue right now on the table for money, if you want money for your campaign, is Israel. I will do more for Israel than he will. He will do more for Israel than she will. It's very simple. There's no serious analysis. And by the way, none of these decisions are informed by any interest that the United States has. And what is our interest in the Middle East? Do we have an interest in going to war with virtually all of the countries in the Middle East? Of course not. But that's where we're headed.
You know, it just really struck me as we were talking. Then if you look across the landscape, it's not hard to figure out whether you're talking about Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, or Trump. They all want to say how they would really do whatever Israel wants, and we're going to back them for as long as it takes, almost like the same thing they were saying about Ukraine, except this time on Israel, they're all saying the same thing. And the interesting thing here that Doug highlights is, where's the American interest? Why is anyone not talking about the American interest in all this? If there is some compelling American interest that our national security is wrapped up in what's going on with in the Middle East there, then say so plainly. Then we get to decide whether we agree with that or not. That's a second part of that. But so far, there's no discussion about that. No one's talking about whether it's Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. Neither one of them are saying, I want to help Israel because this is what it does for America. Some people want to say, just with a statement like a bumper sticker, well, our interest is their interest. I have heard that, and certainly from a lot of Israelis. They really try hard, some of their senior leaders, to say, this is America. Israel's war is America's war. No, it's not. Israel's interests are not synonymous with American interests. Our interests are actually quite different between the Israelis. And look, when you look at them, and we're going to see some more about this here in just a minute, when you look at what all Israel has put on their plate and what they're committing themselves to, and because of this blanket support, what they're committing us to, this is weakening American national interest and American security, because we continue to just give all of these weapon systems, all of these interceptor missiles, all of this money to Israel, to Ukraine, to Taiwan, in addition. And so on top of all this, these stocks, we can't replace them that fast. We've shown you some specific details from this, actually this week and other weeks as well, is that the amount of ammunition and weapons we can create and generate, even with the increase we've done since the Ukraine war started, is still only marginal compared to what the need is, the outlay. So the math is pretty simple. If we keep giving all this stuff away in the quantities we are, there's only one place for it to come from, and that's our war stocks. In the event that we should get dragged into an unnecessary war at any place, or if someone should attack us and we get drawn into a war whether we want to or not, we don't have the capacity to wage it right now. And by supporting these kinds of things, we make it even less and put our security at even greater risk. So what I would like to hear these candidates talk about is how it is that Americans' national security interests are not the overriding concern. You can have friends around the world. You can even have allies. But even an Article 5 ally in NATO comes with the caveat, this specifically stated caveat, that in the event Article 5 is illuminated or instigated, we will then decide on our own how the United States will reply. The common thought, and because it's repeated all the time, is that, attack on one is an attack on all, meaning that if somebody has to go to war, everyone has to go to war. That's not the case. People don't realize that. When you actually read the founding documents and the details of the actual NATO charter, it said each nation's government will decide how they respond to this attack. So we may not provide it with ammunition and weapons, or we may go and fight for them. Any number of things we could do, but that's with a treaty ally. Israel is not a treaty ally. We have agreements that we provide them weapons to help them defend themselves. Now, why have we been spending $3.8 billion every year so that Israel can defend itself? And then here we're going to just shovel hand over fist, give them everything else they ask for. Why is that? That we shouldn't even be thinking about fighting for Israel. And many people are, I assure you. And we're still, even as of right now, we're still wondering if Israel is going to launch something against Iran. They claim they're going to. They say it's going to be lethal and powerful and catch them from a direction they don't understand, all that kind of thing. But if the United States gets drawn into that, we will be in a real world of hurt. But we're already, even having not fought yet, our assets are significantly declining in interceptor missiles, stuff we've been firing in the Red Sea, artillery shells, which we continue to give Israel and Ukraine, and long-range missiles too. Just nearly any kind of thing you want to talk about. Lots of different interceptor types of missiles that we have used so far, both with our aircraft and our ships in the Red Sea and in the area, is depleting our resources. You need to understand that. And we need to get back focused on what's important to our country, and then where we have the capacity and the appropriate policies, then we can help others. But if Israel is going down a path that violates our morals and our values as a country, then that should stop as well. That doesn't get any thought these days, but we're putting it on the table here because that is what America's leaders, or those who aspire to be, should be focused on. Next, I want to go to, we're going to stay on the same topic here. Larry Johnson was on the show this week, and he was talking about whether Israel can even fight this 3, 4, or 7 front war that they self-described. Do they have the capacity?
In Gaza, Hamas continues to grow and expand. It's reportedly actually able to recruit more people to fight with it. So I don't know how this could be considered a viable strategy to open up now at least a 3-front, possibly 4-front war for Israel, because that means your general staff, they've now got a plan in 2 different theaters, essentially, or 3. None of these armies have infinite planning resources. So, I mean, if you're responsible for planning the operations, where are you going to get the personnel? And this increases the chance that they're going to be sloppy, because you know as well as I do, the staffs, those joint staffs, the people that they're actually sitting there having to do, develop the plans for the J3, for the operations folks. They work 24/7. They don't have a cadre of reserves they can call in, and so when they're having to plan, and when in this kind of planning figures, what units do we need? What kind of support units are going to be required? What are the logistics that are going to be required? How are we going to get those logistics in place? Who's responsible for that? What are the communications? What's the medical evacuation? I mean, it goes on and on and on. You know, you've done that planning yourself. The average citizen doesn't appreciate how detailed and in-depth these are. Well, the Israel's either doing one of 2 things. Either they're conducting some plans for these operations into Gaza and southern Lebanon, or they're not. Which, if they're not, maybe that explains why they've had so much trouble in Gaza.
Now, it's important to understand when he's talking about the resources necessary, that means both what Israel has and can produce and what we have and can provide. Now, right now, Israel is fighting an active front against the Houthis in Yemen. It's not a constant thing. It's kind of a sporadic thing, periodic. They sometimes get missiles from Yemen. Sometimes they send airstrikes in the other direction. Uses lots of ordnance, but it's kind of an active open sore really for Israel. Then, of course, they're fighting now over a year in the Gaza Strip against Hamas, and that is also an open bleeding ulcer of a problem for Israel. It's no closer to being solved now than it was a year ago. There is no attainable military objective. They're just fighting and destroying and blowing things up. Talk about where that may be going and why that may be in a minute. Because this is all related. The other thing is that there's a lot more fighting in the West Bank. It doesn't get a lot of press in the West, but it's starting to really expand. In the last couple of months, there's gotten even more violence against the Palestinians, especially in the West Bank, from the IDF and the other security forces, and even some of the settlers in there. So that also takes resources. They're, of course, the biggest one right now is that they're fighting in Lebanon against the Hezbollah. And they have undertaken an enormously difficult task that will take at minimum a year and quite possibly longer. And that assumes that they can sustain that level of operations. And that is not a given. The last year they fought in Hamas and Hezbollah against Hamas in the Gaza Strip was a pretty small contained area. This is much, much, much larger. And because it'll be coming on top of this one, it's going to be an even more difficult. So if you don't even put Iran into this conversation here, it's going to be, I don't even see how Israel is going to continue to maintain this. Because I say at least a year, that's at least. It could go a lot longer. We don't know yet just how fierce the Hezbollah side is going to fight. We don't know how hard it's going to be, especially if these other groups start coming in there. There's all kinds of militias from the region and just individual foreign fighters like we saw during my time in Afghanistan and Iraq. We saw lots of foreign fighters come over because that's where the fight was. The enemies of Islam were fighting, and they just like a magnet drew Muslim fighters really from all over the world, especially in the Middle East. I can't imagine anything different than that's going to happen this time against Israel. So we'll continue to see that. But that is all difficult. Now, when you add on the next layer of going after Iran and starting a war that can't be won, you can't win a war with missile strikes. And this seductive thought that you can do to Iran what they did to Hezbollah by taking out the leader, and that's going to cause the war to end. Just look at what happened with the shot to Nasrallah. And then I think at least two of the next two leaders that were allegedly at the top have also already been taken out. And then a ton of their top generals have been taken out. Has that caused Hezbollah to fall apart? Does it stop the fighting of the troops in the southern Lebanon that are going against Israel right now? And by the way, as of Friday morning, there had been at least officially 12, I think, or 11 or 12 Israeli soldiers killed and 168 wounded. And that's just in just a handful of days fighting now at the very, very beginning. So we don't know if those numbers are true. We don't know what they're doing on the Hezbollah. So there's a real information blackout, but we know a lot of fighting's going on, and there hasn't been a lot of progress. This is just the beginning. So who's going to support this? Who's going to provide all of this ammunition that's going to be needed for a lot longer than has happened so far? And if Israel does strike into Iran, even if they take out the mullahs, even if they take out the Ayatollah, there's still plenty of people. It's not like you're going to get rid of the entire IRGC or the entire theocratic leadership. You're not going to do that. It'll be replaced there too. Did Al-Qaeda fall apart when we got rid of bin Laden? Did Al-Qaeda in Iraq fall apart when we got rid of Zarqawi? You see, there's always somebody else to step in. So it's a seductive thing, and it's a fool's errand to go after, to think you're going to win it. So if Israel starts a war against Iran, but they don't have the capacity to win a war against Iran, then all you're doing by striking is to start an open-ended bleed of just going to suck down resources. It's going to invite continual strikes into Israel. It's going to make them the opposite of more secure. And so, again, you just have to actually ask, what is the actual objective? Now, more evidence is starting to pile up, and more public statements are starting to come out, like from Smotrich, the one of the cabinet member officials in Netanyahu's government this week, said that, we want actually part of Lebanon, part of Syria, and certainly more of the territory that we've already gotten so far. And by some other Israelis, they're saying that even parts of Iraq and Iran. So they actually want a whole part of it, and Egypt too. We might as well throw that in there since they did. So when you see what they're doing in Hamas, against Hamas in the Gaza Strip, where they're literally wiping out the ability to sustain life, when you see them expanding their operations in the West Bank, and now then they're moving into southern Lebanon. By the way, Israel has previously published a map that shows that what they call Greater Israel includes southern Lebanon, where they want to replace that and put Israeli settlers in there. Now, Whether this is just individuals saying this, whether this is just wishful thinking, it's too early to say. We don't have enough information, but there is enough evidence that some of these aspirations are matching what we see on the ground. Is that something the United States should support? Is America's interest to literally supply Israel into creating this greater Israeli nation? If that's what Israel wants to do and it wants to pay the price for that, I strongly argue against it, because it's not good for them, and it would be catastrophic for the region, because it would almost certainly cause a major region-wide war. Not just whether the U.S. could get dragged into it, but if these other nations could also get dragged. And I guarantee you, whether it's Jordan or Syria or Iraq or Egypt, they're not going to be passive if Israel starts moving into their territory at some point in the future. They're at some point going to take some action. So this is a fool's game if they think they're going to get that done. It is time for the Americans to say, that's it. I don't care about political party. I don't care about ideology. I don't care about what anybody thinks. This is bad for our country. We don't have the capacity to do it, and we are not going to put American national security at risk to give you the ammunition to do something that violates every tenet that we claim to believe in. That's what should happen. We'll see what does. And one of the risks of that was also expanded upon on another show we did this week by former British member of Parliament, George Galloway, when he talked about, is World War III on the horizon?
We are looking down the barrel of World War III, not in one theater, but in two theaters, with a third one, the South China Sea, the Straits of Taiwan, looming just over the horizon. And we're no longer in a position to dictate terms to other people, to send gunboats up the Yangtze, to tell them what they have to do. We were that empire. You were that empire. But neither of us is that empire anymore. And so we're going to have to learn to avoid these zero-sum games. We're going to have to learn to realize that win-win outcomes of negotiations are what we need to be seeking. We are no longer the policeman of the world. Well, we've long ceased to be. But I've got news for McCormick. So have you ceased to be, as is being proved on the battlefields of the Ukraine, and as probably very shortly will be proved in the Persian Gulf and in the Levant.
You know, a lot of people are kind of loose and easy with this. You know, we're heading to World War III. A lot of people want to scare people by making those claims. But there is starting to be some real justification for these. This is not empty threats or rhetoric. When you look around, I just laid out in great detail all the issues that are affecting the Middle East and how that region by itself could really explode. But then, of course, you also have the Russia-Ukraine war, which gives every possibility for that to expand. There's actually talk that maybe some Westerners, even British soldiers, I saw a headline on Friday that said that there's some consideration in UK to send British soldiers into Ukraine to train up the Ukraine side to, you know, work out some logistics issues. And so what are we talking about? 50 or 60? Are we talking about 1,000? No one knows. But you see, you keep on inching closer to getting in there. Whether the West, US, UK, France will give permission to use long-range weapons to fire deeper into Russia, that apparently is still on the table. Russia has been unequivocal about saying they will consider that the direct participation of the West, and wherever it comes from, they will respond outside of the Ukraine territory, outside of the theater of war. So that could spark it. Then, of course, anything out inside of Western Europe or anywhere else in Europe is going to have the potential for an Article 5 trigger. And then everything bad becomes possible for that. Then also the Taiwan, South China Sea issue. There's, you know, we keep sending more and more money to Taiwan. They keep making more and more moves that the Chinese view as provocative by talking about how they're going to move towards independence. China keeps conducting all these military operations. You see joint military operations between China and Russia, and Iran has been added into a few of those. You see more moves by North Korea, where they're getting more and more belligerent. There's reports this past week that they're going to send troops to Ukraine to fight with Russia against Ukraine potentially. So you see, it is not empty rhetoric that we could be moving in that direction. And the key thing that George said there that could mitigate against all of that is diplomacy and looking for win-win outcomes. See, we're not at World War right now. There's the boiling in the Israeli fight against all of its enemies there, and there's the Russia-Ukraine war. Those are both actively boiling, but they can be tamped down. They could both be emptied. And I'm going to show you what Viktor Orban is doing, who's trying to get to that very outcome in just a second. But all of them can be put down. There's not any single one of them that must be burning. There is a way to end them all. Especially the Russia-Ukraine war, as long as it's gone, an end is going to be very difficult to get, but it can be found. What I can tell you with a lot of confidence is that to avoid looking for a win-win, because to say the situation that Russia can't have a win, Lebanon can't have a win, Hamas can't have, all of the enemies, no one can have a win. It has to be a win-lose. As long as you do that, you're guaranteeing and giving every reason for the opposition not to have a negotiated settlement. Understand that. If your objective is to have peace and security, you will not get it trying to achieve a military victory. All you're going to do is create more enemies and increase the incentive of those who are arrayed against you to fight harder. You can't kill everybody that you don't like. It just doesn't work. Aside from being unethical and immoral, it doesn't work. All you do is harm yourself. You harm your own interests. And right now, if we were to, as the West, to embark upon a new movement in diplomacy where we're going to get back to what we periodically have done well, and that's effective diplomacy and negotiations, to where let's sit down and talk even with those people we don't like, even with those people we hate. Let's have a discussion. Is there any room to have any kind of common ground here that we can start from anywhere and then try to branch out to that to lower the chances that anyone has to be killed anywhere? If you did a win-win type situation right now, you could bring the Russia-Ukraine war, you could end the fighting almost immediately. Almost overnight, you could end the fighting. And then it would take a long, long time, many months, possibly even years, to come to an actual negotiated end to the fighting. But it is possible. Same thing in the Middle East. But Israel has no interest whatsoever in ending the fighting. They do want a military success. So there's not even the concept of win-win. They won't even entertain the possibility. They want win destruction. So that's off the table there. And of course, we should do the same thing in the Indo-Pacific area. It's also plenty of room for negotiated settlement to lower those temperatures so that one doesn't even blow up. But if we continue going down the path of letting Israel do what I just described there and supporting it, physically giving them the wherewithal to have that horrific kind of mentality, and if we keep on having this same thing that we have in the Russia-Ukraine war, we're going to get World War III. And there are many nations that have nuclear weapons right now. And if we keep going far enough, we'll compel and force Iran into a place where it creates nuclear weapons, and we'll add another point of instability there. That's how serious this is right now. So the last thing I want to show you here is a discussion at the European Parliament that happened a couple of days ago, where there was an interesting engagement and speech, a dueling speeches between Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Union, and Viktor Orban, who is the leader of Hungary, but he's acting as the leader of the rotating presidency of the European Union itself. Now, Ursula von der Leyen is going to say, hey, she's going to think in these black and white terms that are of her preference. If you talk about peace, some people confuse peace with surrender because she thinks that's the only way to get there. Apparently, she didn't study the George Galloway win-win proposition. She thinks it has to be our way or no way. So in the comments that you're going to hear from her, I want you to pay attention for one thing, because it's not going to be readily apparent from this clip. She's going to be talking about freedom fighters there and how in the past some freedom fighters from Europe act in a certain way. That will not be missed by Viktor Orban, because she's talking about some of the freedom fighters in Hungary that resisted Soviet occupation. Watch her comments, and then we'll get Viktor on the backside.
We Europeans may have different histories and different languages, but there's no European language in which peace is synonymous with surrender and sovereignty is synonymous with occupation. The people of Ukraine are freedom fighters, just like the heroes that freed Central and Eastern Europe from Soviet rule. And there's only one path to achieve a just peace for Ukraine and for Europe. We must continue to empower Ukraine's resistance with political, financial, and military support. So, we are making Russia pay for the damage it caused, and we will stand with Ukraine through this winter and for as long as it takes.
You know, if she made that comment in, I don't know, the summer of 2022, maybe even the fall, actually, yeah, including even the fall, especially after Ukraine had what's almost certainly going to go down as its two signature victories, where they forced Russia out of the Kherson area, physically to abandon Kherson city, and then out of the Kharkiv region, where the thousands of square kilometers of territory were surrendered by Russian after the Ukraine side had forced them out. If she'd have made that comment there, then you might have forgiven her for saying, well, I can understand your exuberance, and it's some plausibility there. I did argue at the time that it wasn't logical, because when you look at the sum total of the massive amount of capacity that the Russian side had, and at the very limited amount of capacity that the Ukraine side, along with all of its partners, had, it still didn't make any sense, because you just can't win against that. The resources and the inputs are just so far out of balance that it doesn't make any sense. And it would have been a really smart thing for Europe to get behind a desire to have a negotiated settlement then at the best terms they probably would ever have gotten for Ukraine, because Russia was hurting. In fact, they were hurting so bad, they were apparently given serious consideration to using tactical nuclear weapons. That's been revealed by former CIA director, or I'm sorry, current CIA director, former diplomat Burns, not long ago. So we know that was serious there. But that's not when this speech was made. This is made right now, when this is after the disastrous 2023, the whole year where Ukraine tried to have an offensive against Russia, and it was a disastrous, complete and utter failure in every category. Russia had built 5 defensive lines and were ready to have a defense in depth, etc. Ukraine didn't even get past the first one. And now everything that even the little they got up to get up that line is now lost. All of the last 12 full months has been nothing but a relentless Russian onslaught. It hasn't been huge and big, though there have been some significant increases in the pace of the territorial acquisitions in the last month and a half, but it still has been comparatively slow, like from, say, World War II side, where there's a lot bigger movements that went on. There is no path to victory for Ukraine. None. There is no manpower for Ukraine to ever reverse this situation. There is not the capacity. I've already talked to you about the limitations the U.S. already has for what we've given away. We just don't have a lot of stuff to give, nor does any other country in the West. So when she's talking all this brash stuff about we're going to stay with them because it sounds really emphatic, and she got all these applause and yay, we love those sentiments. But if it's not anchored to reality, if you don't actually have the capacity to give them the massive, massive amount of equipment that would be necessary, and ammunition and arms and all that, and if Ukraine doesn't have the substantial manpower that would be necessary to use all of this stuff. Look, it doesn't matter if you give F-16s or French fighters or a whole bunch of M1 tanks or Challenger tanks or Leopard tanks, etc. All of these things, it doesn't matter if you even give them the best of this stuff if you don't have anybody who can use it. And Ukraine has suffered so many casualties. And now then they are literally scraping the bottom of the barrel, grabbing people off the streets. People are actually being killed in Ukraine for resisting trying to be taken in. Do you realize that? They're so afraid to go into this fighting that they're being killed. The people who are leaving the fight and abandoning their positions is getting so many they have to continue to compel people to come in, not to replace combat losses, but to replace people who go AWOL and just quit fighting. And those numbers are growing bigger. That's not his secret. That's not information that's not readily available. And certainly she has access to classified information. All of these people defies logic and ration. Why you want to ignore so many categories of ground truth reality that augur against the successful accomplishment of what you're talking about and the risk that you have of getting drawn into a larger war. You claim you want to avoid a larger war with Russia, and yet all their actions are moving us closer to war with Russia and an expansion of the war. Now, fortunately, it's not the entire European Union. There are a number of people. You have, not in NATO, not just the European Union. You have Erdogan in Turkey. Absolutely wants this war to come to an end. He's tried several times to help negotiate an end to it. You have Fico from Slovakia is outspoken that this war needs to come to an end. Olaf Scholz from Germany has recently been saying it's time to find some kind of negotiated settlement. We're not going to give any permission to use our long-range weapons, and we don't have that much other stuff to give you anyway, so let's talk about some peace. They've all taken a lot of heat from that. Nobody more than Viktor Orban, however, of Hungary. And in this article, or this excerpt I'm going to play here, he really goes into, first of all, he directly answers von der Leyen's comment about the freedom fighters, but then he goes on to make some other really important points.
I fully reject what you said, President of the Commission. Any comparison with what freedom fighters did in 1956 was a mistake, and it has nothing to do with what happened in 1956, what's going on in Ukraine now. It's a complete mistake to make a comparison between those two things. The European Union has a mistaken policy when it comes to this war. If we want to win, then we need to change this losing strategy that we are currently implementing. It was a poorly planned and poorly implemented strategy. If we continue on that route, we're going to lose. If we don't want Ukraine to lose, then we need to change strategy. And I think that you should consider that. In every war, there needs to be diplomatic work, we need to have communication, direct and indirect contacts. If we don't do that, then we will go even deeper into war, and the situation will be even more desperate. More and more people will die. Hundreds of thousands of people have died. Thousands of people are dying while we're talking here now. And with this strategy, we won't find any solution in the battlefield. So I think we need to stand up for peace. We need to focus on a ceasefire and create a different strategy, because otherwise we will all lose.
It's hard to add anything to that, and I've really said a lot of it here, so I'm not going to go into too much more depth on it, but that is the rational position. All the things I said, he knows that's what a rational person would do, and it would make enormous sense for the United States to finally get behind something like this that has a chance to succeed and stop being some of these, going down these things that we try where we just want to keep fighting because it sounds good or it's politically motivated or we don't want to lose an election. Because you get to the point to where you don't want to lose an election and you may end up finding that you're going to fight a war. You shouldn't fight and can't win. That's your deep dive for today. That's your Bray Intel Brief. Thank you very much, and we will look forward to seeing you on next week. Also, remember, we have on podcast now, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, anywhere you get your podcast. Daniel Davis Deep Dive, type that in, and you'll be good to go. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.